This is the Italian Real Estate Podcast, here to help you with the ins and outs and basics of Italian real estate, presented by ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. Hello there, and welcome to another edition of the Italian Real Estate Podcast, presented by ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. Of course, we are back at it again with Italian real estate attorney Marco Permunian. How you doing, man?
Good, how are you?
I am doing great, thank you. And today, we wanted to get into the topic regarding some of the biggest mistakes that people make when buying or purchasing property in Italy. And Marco, I'm sure you've come across quite a few mistakes, but maybe let's just get started on our list with not really in any kind of particular order, but the first one regarding investment property and some of the mistakes you've seen there.
Well, when it comes to investing in Italy, one of the mistakes that I've seen is buying a property without doing thorough due diligence, or buying a property at all costs, maybe because you like the area, maybe because you've heard that the return on investment is good, or maybe because you think the prices will always continue to go up. The thing is, the Italian market can be a little bit different from the US market, where prices tend to increase constantly. While in Italy, prices have been a little bit stagnant in the past year, so we have not seen a huge increase in the past years, which means, that it's always good, of course, this is a general rule, but especially in Italy, it's good to buy a property at a cost that is lower than what its value is, because if you needed to resell it, then it's easier, especially because Italian citizens, they don't have the same liquidity, they don't have the same availability of funds that maybe a foreign buyer can have. So while maybe it's easier for a foreign buyer because prices in Italy are lower than other countries like America. So while it might be easier for a foreign buyer to just buy a property in Italy, it might be more difficult for an Italian to then buy the same property when the buyer wants them to sell it. So just be careful and be conscious that the pricing of the prices of houses not necessarily will go up. They could stay the same. So I'd say when it's an investment, always make sure that you are buying in an area and at a price that allows you to then maybe sell the property easily when you don't need it anymore. And also, one additional piece of advice that is strictly related to Italy: just do not be afraid to negotiate the price. Especially in Italy, it's all about negotiating the price, not only the price of real estate, but also in general. When you're buying in Italy, it's just in the culture, in the Italian culture, people negotiate. So some homeowners will just put the property for sale at a higher price because they already know that the potential buyer will negotiate. Especially if it's an Italian buyer. And that's something that some foreign buyer may not know, may not expect, that you have to negotiate that much in Italy. And that's allowed, that's encouraged, and that's normal, I should say. So just do not be afraid to negotiate and understand the circumstances. If you see that there is room for negotiation, then go for it. And of course, an Italian professional, an attorney, a real estate agent can help you understand if there is room for negotiation.
That definitely makes a lot of sense. And actually, just to kind of piggyback a little bit off of that last point that you made about working with professionals such as ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com, or working in combination with ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com and an agent of some sort, it's important to understand who is trustworthy, who is not trustworthy, and how to figure out some of those things. I know that when you guys are working with your clients, you help to make sure that you are working with the most trustworthy people, and that your clients are only working with people who are actually worthwhile working with. And how do you go about figuring out who's trustworthy and maybe who isn't trustworthy?
Yeah, that's probably the second mistake that I see very often, which would be working with somebody who's not trustworthy. Working maybe with a real estate agent who wants to sell the property at all costs. If you're working with an attorney, the attorney is working to protect you, no matter if the deal closes or not. But if you're working with a real estate agent, just be careful, because some real estate agents, it's their profession, so they want to sell. They want that you buy. So they might push you to buy a property, even if it's not the property that you're looking for, even if it's not a good deal for you. Of course, not everybody's like that, but I'd say a common mistake is to work with the wrong professional that wants that you buy that property at all costs, especially if it's a property in their network, something that they were asked to sell. Just be sure that maybe you get a lawyer by your side, especially if you are a foreign buyer. I think that will not hurt for sure. And also maybe be sure to check reviews online for the professionals that you're working with, especially when it comes to real estate agents. Some reviews will be maybe on Google reviews, but then you can maybe try to check their Facebook pages to see if there are additional reviews, and to see if the rating matches on Facebook and Google. So just be extremely cautious, especially when you are buying as a foreign buyer. Once again, be sure maybe to have an attorney by your side that can help you understand the process, understand the rules, that speaks English, and that can get you to the finish line without complications.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it, is having somebody there with your language. They're fighting for you, with you, going to bat on your behalf, is massive, no matter what the situation is, whether it's real estate or even, I know you also offer citizenship services, because we also do the Italian citizenship podcast, and you have ItaliancitizenshipAssistance.com. It's a whole different thing. But there's, with the real estate and even renting in Italy, like not knowing some of the little basic things, if you're not from Italy and you don't know how certain things are done, even with negotiating rent, sometimes, like that's something that people wouldn't necessarily even think of, but it is possible to do. But I know that another issue that can come up, and you've told me in the past that not necessarily specific people, but that it has been an issue where you have, not an issue, but that you've had clients come to you with an issue that they had dealt with real estate agents who weren't trustworthy and got them into some property that wasn't good from a legal standpoint. Maybe do you want to go over how you can properly confirm if a property actually is proper from a legal standpoint?
Yeah, that's one more mistake that some people make, buying a property and, rushing and not checking that the property is compliant from a legal standpoint, urban planning standpoint. So there are ways that an attorney can help you with to check if the property has, for example, limitations or liens. If the seller is really the seller, there are some cases where it's maybe a variety of sellers, co-owners, and one of them pretends to be the only owner. So there are many things that need to be checked in advance before you commit to buying a property. Of course, the law gives you some protection, meaning that normally you enter into a preliminary agreement with the seller and you pay a deposit, and then you do your due diligence. And if you're not happy with what you found out, you can ask the seller to refund you your deposit. Actually, you're entitled to the double if the seller backs out, or if the property has some issues. But of course, if the seller is not willing to give you back the deposit or double the deposit, which is what you're entitled to, you can only get it back through litigation, which is something that you want to avoid. So I think getting an experienced attorney by your side who can check if the property is compliant from a legal standpoint, from a urban planning standpoint, from a cadastral standpoint. And, we're talking about a very old system, the Italian one. So there are a lot of laws and regulations in place that are very, very old and difficult to understand if you're a foreign buyer. Of course, there's also the notary, which is a key person in the process. However, that comes into play only at the end of the process, and that will also check if everything is in order from a legal standpoint, but the notary doesn't have the tools to check everything for you to see if the property is fully compliant to any possible laws. So having an attorney who speaks English and who is working for you only, and doing things in your best interest, I think that's the best choice when you're buying as a foreign individual.
Makes a lot of sense, especially with all the things that can come up a person may not necessarily be familiar with. And so I know that's also a mistake, is not taking that planning into consideration.
Yeah, that's definitely another common mistake, thinking that, you're buying a property that costs an X amount of money, and there are no other costs that need to be taken into consideration. But unfortunately, that's not true, because when buying a property in Italy, there are always extra costs that you need to take into consideration. So the price that you see online or the price that you negotiate with the seller is not the final amount that you will have to pay for that property. You need to take into consideration the notary fees that you have to pay. It's necessary for you to pay the notary fees. It's not that it can be negotiated that, for example, that the seller pays half and you pay half. What normally happens is that you, the buyer, are expected to pay the cost of the notary. And some people, they don't know that. We're talking about a professional who is a lawyer, who went to law school and attended additional years of school to become a notary. It's a public official, and the cost can be, for a normal property, like let's say 100,000 euros property, you might have to pay the notary 1,000 to 2,000 euros, just to give people an idea. So it's not inexpensive. And then in addition to that, you might have to pay a real estate agent if you got in contact with the real estate agent, with the agent who has an exclusive agreement to sell the property with the owner. So if the owner gave the agent an exclusive right to sell the property and you got in contact with the agent, then you're going to have to pay the commission fee of the agent, which could be the 2, 3, even 4% in some cases. So quite expensive, especially if it's a luxury property advertised by those real estate agents that work with foreign buyer. But on the other end, if the owner didn't give an exclusive right to sell the property to a specific real estate agent, and you get in contact directly with the owner or through us, which is normally what people do. They hire us to bypass the real estate agent when possible and to go straight to the owner, which can save a lot of money, a considerable amount of money, when a foreign buyer wants to buy in Italy. But like you just said, the mistake that people make is thinking that all you have to do is pay for the property, because you have to pay, as I just said, the notary, you have to pay the real estate agent when that's necessary. You have to pay the registration tax, which it's not an insignificant amount, and that it's a flat tax that you pay only one time. So it's a one-time tax that you pay at the time of the purchase, and the amount varies depending on whether you're buying as a resident, as a non-resident. We've talked about the registration tax in many other episodes. And for example, if you are planning to move into the property within 18 months from the purchase, you pay only 2%. But then if you don't move, so if you fail to establish a residency where the property is, then you have to pay the additional 7%. So the total becomes the 9%. But then if you're an Italian citizen who's living abroad and who's buying their first home in Italy, you only pay the 2%. So there is a whole set of rules that, we talked about extensively in other videos, and that I would encourage our audience to watch if they're interested in understanding how much the registration tax is. But there's always this one-time tax that you have to pay, and that, along with a notary fee, brings up the price not insignificantly.
Very interesting. And I guess maybe just to round things out into the last of our 5 points here, I'm going to get a little bit nerdy here, a little bit of a Star Wars quote that attachment is forbidden to the Jedi. And when you are purchasing property in Italy, attachment can also become something that can cause problems and to the dark side of real estate in any country. But of course, Italy as well is not immune from this as well. And so maybe do you want to talk about this last point about why maybe getting attached to a property is probably not the best idea?
Yeah, especially for Americans, they have the dream of Italy. And when they see something, which is not necessarily a negative thing, but when they see something, they just want to go for it. They see some photos online of a beautiful Italian property. I mean, how to blame them? It's just Italy is beautiful.
It's gorgeous.
And it's gorgeous. And some people get emotionally attached to a property that maybe has some issues. So be sure to maybe hire an attorney that can work by your side to see if the property is fully compliant with all the laws and regulations. And if it's not a good deal, you should be ready to hear that it's not a good deal. So just do not skip your due diligence. Even if you really like a property that you saw, just make sure that you hire a professional that can help you ensure that the property is a good investment.
And let's maybe think about the situation that you spoke about before, that somebody sees a picture of a property online. It's out in the Tuscan countryside. It's a villa. And sometimes these old villas can have problems with them. But maybe, would you mind going into some of the issues that can come up with these properties, especially older properties?
Well, you might find that a property needs extensive renovation works, for example, that were not advertised, and those can be very challenging to do in Italy, where there are tons of regulations that need to be respected. And Italy, is not flat, so you might have to deal with special renovation works because the property was not built on a flat area. Maybe it's on a hill, and the renovation works are particularly delicate. That's one thing to pay extra attention to. And that also, what you have to do is to pay attention to the fact that the house needs to be a house. Some houses are on paper have a different use. For example, maybe it's an office, but then it looks like a house, but then on paper it can only be used as an office, and you need to go through a process to change that with the municipal offices, and that can be very expensive and and then a very long process. But also when you are buying, for example, a piece of land, you have to make sure that you can build on that land. And because in Italy, you have to comply with the zoning requirements, there will be some areas that are only meant to be agricultural areas. So you cannot really build anything on that land. So sometimes the land, you will see that the land is less expensive than other pieces of land that are nearby in the same town, maybe because on those pieces of land, you can actually build a property, whereas on the other pieces of land, you can only use them for agricultural purposes. So if you're looking to buy a piece of land where you want to build, just make sure that the local government has authorized the construction of a house on that very land.
It's really interesting that you bring up the zoning, just because I have very vivid memories of looking for places to live in Italy, and even just going for an apartment. The zoning and the registration of the property being an office or a place where you can live will not only just make a difference for just the basic ability to be able to reside within the place, but also if you're wanting to get health care or residency. And to be able to get residency, you actually have to be in a property where you can have residence. And there was one agency that took me to go look at an apartment. They said, "Oh, it's a beautiful place. It was recently used as an office." That set off some alarm bells, because I know in Italy things work a little bit differently when it comes to that. And so I asked, is it registered as an apartment, like a place where you can live, or is it registered as an office? They're like, oh, it's registered as an office, but it's really cheap. And it was really cheap because it was registered as an office, because they didn't want to go through the process of registering it as a normal apartment. I was like, well, can I get registration for my residency? And he's like, yeah, that might be an issue. So in the end,
it's interesting that you mentioned that, because, especially in America, normally when you look at real estate, I mean, you can tell immediately if that building is an office or a home. I mean, there's no confusion at all, right? So you see an office, it's clear it's an office. You see a house, it's very clear it's a house. But in Italy, it's a little bit different, because there are some offices. I mean, I believe in cities, in the Italian cities, a lot of offices are in the same building where there are apartments. So you can't really tell if that building was meant for apartments or offices, because in the city center, there is a limited amount of space. So basically they converted some buildings and some units within buildings into offices. And you might even find buildings that have like some offices and some apartments even on the same floor. So you will not understand which part of the building is for offices, which part of the building is for apartments. Maybe you go on the first floor, there's one apartment and 3 offices on the second floor, 2 apartments and 1 office. That's perfectly normal in Italy. So that's why you have to pay extra attention to how that specific unit, especially if it's a condo, how that specific unit is registered.
I just have to share actually a quick story about the first time that you and I met in person, because we had been friendly online for a little while before even meeting in person. And the first time when I came to your office, and not to give anything away, but I hope you don't mind my saying this, but the building that you were in at the time, I walked up to it. And I said, no, this can't be the right place. I was like, something seems wrong. This is an apartment building. Why would there be an office inside of this place? But little did I know there was a wonderful, beautiful office inside of it. And so, like you were saying, exactly, in that building, even that you were in, you had some apartments, some residential apartments, as well as some office spaces. The bottom floor were shops. It just was... You couldn't tell what was going on in there. And it was just a mixture of everything. And in the States, especially because of how zoning laws work, that you don't normally have residential and commercial within the same location, unless it's like a very older kind of area. But very old in American terms is a very different concept than what it might be in Italy. It was really interesting to get to see how, because Italy is a bit of a smaller country and people do tend to live closer together, and because of people living in apartments, that it's very important to make sure that the space is not only used, but it's used well. And so you do find, like you were saying, a lot of those apartments that are not actually apartments. But anyway, Marco, I think this is actually going to be a great place to round out this episode. So thank you so much for making yourself available. And if anybody is looking to have a lawyer with them while they're purchasing their property in Italy, how can they get in contact with you and your team?
People can contact us through our website, italianrealestatelawyers.com, or give us a call. Our number is on the website.
Absolutely fantastic. And of course, if you're interested in more content like this about Italian real estate, be sure that you're subscribed to not only the YouTube channel, but also the audio-only podcast on your favorite podcasting platform of choice. But of course, the bonus of being subscribed to the YouTube channel is that you're also automatically subscribed to the Italian Citizenship Podcast, where we talk about the legal aspects about being able to live in Italy, being an Italian citizen, getting Italian citizenship. Really, it's such an amazing, I'm not just tooting my own horn here, or our horns, but really, if you are interested in those topics, it is so important to be able to go and check that out. It is probably the most in-depth resource that you will find. I think I can say that pretty confidently. I think that's actually a very unique thing about what you and I do, Marco. Just as a little side note, just before we end, that this is really, I think, about as deep as it goes when we're talking about both real estate and citizenship. So it's, of course, wonderful to be able to collaborate with you, Marco, on both of these projects. And so, of course, make sure that you tune in to these projects that Marco and I collaborate on here on this YouTube channel, as as well as the audio-only podcasts. Of course, if you're interested in more content about life abroad, living abroad as an Italian dual citizen expat, feel free to come over to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rafael Di Furia, where I do some sit-down episodes as well as get out and about for a bit of fun. Of course, thank you again, Mr. Marco Permunian from ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com for making yourself available. Of course, this has been another episode of the Italian Real Estate Podcast. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and we will see you all next time. Later.
Thank you.